It's so good to be with you. I sent my wife a picture and I said, "There's so many guys here. This is amazing." I get to preach a lot, but when you're preaching, I think if you're preaching well, it's like a lot less of you and a lot more of like what Bible passage you're preaching, and you want to highlight Christ. And so you don't tell like a ton of stories about yourself. And so Connor and I were talking, and he was like, "Oh, that story about your friend and you on the mountain, like that would be amazing." And so I thought, well, that'd be great. Let's go back and let's share some of those moments. So a little bit about me. I'm a Cobb County native. I've been here a long time. I've never lived in a mountainous state. I used to go to Kennesaw Mountain all the time when I went to Kennesaw State, and like I still go over there and run, but. Like that was we'd go up to like North Georgia when we were kids, and we'd fish in the trout streams. And so I didn't really know what mountains were until I was 16 years old, and my dad, he took us on a business trip. Like we never got to go on business trips with him. He and my mom would leave, and we'd stay with like a grandparent or something. And so this trip we got to go, and we went. He had some meetings in Denver, and then he had some meetings out in a couple of other spots, and we made it this super long road trip where we went through Rocky Mountain National Park. And when we were in the park, I remember looking up at the Rockies for the first time. If you've been out west, if you didn't grow up out in mountains and you go for the first time, you're just enamored. Like it doesn't matter if you go in the summer, if you go in the winter, you go in the fall, you go in the spring. It doesn't matter if it's mud season and all the locals are like, this is the worst. When you go for the first time and you see the mountains, you're just amazed. And I have no idea why, but the first time I saw the Rockies, it just came out of my mouth. I said, "Can you get to the top of those?" And my dad from the front seat said, "Why would you want to?" And I was like, "I don't know." And this just something I knew nothing about rock climbing or mountain climbing or mountaineering. I didn't know anything about any of that. And so it was my first thought, though, of what would it be like to go on top of one of those? And it was, again, I really wasn't adventurous. Like I played sports and I rode like my BMX bike and just normal kid stuff, but the thought just didn't leave. And so as I was about to graduate college, I went to the school library and I got on one of the computers and I started looking up like climbing and I found these pictures of these guys out in I didn't even know what state it was, but it was these guys on this like heavily glaciated mountain, and they had their ice axes and they had crampons and they had all their stuff, and it was looked super steep and scary, and I thought, that's what I'll do for graduation. And so I went back and I found out that it was Mount Rainier, which I didn't know where Rainier was. I was like, that's amazing. Who knew that was here? And so I told my dad, and he was like, "That's what you want for your graduation present? You want to go to Mount Rainier?" And I said, "That's what I want." And he said, "No, not like how about like luggage or like a trip to Europe or like whatever?" And I was like, "That's what I want." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to send your brother with you." My brother's like very level-headed, and he's not super impetuous. And so I was like, "I don't care." He said, "Mom, like I don't care. I want to go. That's where I want to go." And he said, "And you're not just going to like go, because they have these cattle drives on the big mountains where there's a mountaineering company, and they just basically put a whole bunch of people on a rope, and they set off at about midnight, and they just start telling people like, you can't keep going, you can't keep going, you can't keep going, because everybody's a liability that's like a little bit slow, and so by the end the sun's coming up and you're kind of close to summiting, and there's like 4 of you left, and you don't learn any skills, any of that. So he said, what was there a school? And I found this 5-day course that you could take with Rainier Mountaineering Incorporated. So I went on this course. My brother and I went, and I was like hooked. We learned so many incredible things. We learned what a serac is, and how to avoid ice fall, and what to do if there is ice fall, and how to help somebody get out of a crevasse. I didn't even know what crevasses were, and we learned like how to do the French technique with your crampons and those things. I was like, this is it. And one of the guys out there, one of the guides, offered me and my brother to come back and work. And I was like, unbelievable. I could be a mountain guide. A Georgia boy could be a mountain guide. And I had just started working at a church. I had just graduated. I just started working at a church as a college pastor. And I was like, I think that's what God wants me to do. And it was the first time in my life I was really torn between like, is God trying to take away my fun? Or is there something greater in life than fun? And so I put mountain climbing on the back burner for just a short period of time. And then I started going annually, like out west and climbing. And so I'll just show you a few things real quick, just so you know if I say these things in this particular story, so you'll know what they are. These pointy things on the back of my pack, you wear these on the bottom of your feet. These are crampons, and they just came back from South America. A friend of mine borrowed them to go climb in South America, and they make your foot completely rigid, so there's no more flexing of your toes or anything else that your foot is supposed to bend. It doesn't anymore. You can climb ice, you can climb snow, you can also climb mixed terrain, which is ice and snow and rock. And so these are ice axes. This axe is a little bit shorter axe, a little more aggressive axe, and the way you carry these, if you know all this, great. And if you don't, then it's kind of important for the rest of the story. But the way you carry this is you carry it in your hand, and you carry the pick always facing behind you. This is the pick, the sharp part here. You always carry it facing behind you when you're using it to walk. When you're using it to climb, you obviously turn this way, and you have a leash on it, and you stick it in. It's amazing how this will hold, like, I'm 220 pounds, and it'll hold no problem all day long, and you can climb. So you can climb vertically, or you can use it, and you can walk. When you fall, the way you self-arrest with one of these is you're climbing, you're moving it along as you walk, and if you start to slip and fall, you bring it to your chest, and you fall on the pick. And it 9 out of 10 times will stop you cold when you dig this thing into the side of a mountain. And so I learned all of this on the first trip that we took to Rainier, and the skills have been very important. And so time went on, and I learned more rock climbing after that. And so I got into rock climbing. And if some of you are climbers, I'm not a great climber. I'm not a great mountaineer. I'm just like, I kind of get better when things go bad. That's like if I have one gift, it's just like hustle. And so like, that's about my only gift. I mean, I'm not built like a climber. And so like the hardest I've ever climbed clean is a 5'11 plus. And so I'm not like a 5'13 climber or even a solid 5'12 climber. So when we go to the Alpine, we only climb in like the 5'8 realm. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, totally fine. 5'8, just go to Stone Summit, climb a 5'8. Pretty much everybody in the room can climb a 5'8. But when you go so this combining, learning to rock climb and then knowing how to mountaineer, all of a sudden it opened up a whole new world, a world called alpine climbing. And so alpine climbing is fast and light climbing, where you take your crampons, you take your ice axe, but you also take your rock climbing gear, and you can climb these mountains that have snow on parts, rock on parts. And so it's like, I don't know, it's the heroine of climbing. Like you do it and you're like, I will sell everything to do this. First, second, third born, sell them all. Like it's really like, it's really incredible, and you kind of feel like a badass. Like I'm not at church, so it's fine. Like you kind of do, because you're like, man, we were way down here on flat land with everybody else at an airport a few hours ago, and now we're with like just us and God and this equipment, and we don't go with guides. Like we know how to do it on our own. So like we're like out there. And so when the guides see you and they know you're like an independent group, they're like, we're gonna have dinner with you and leave the clients over there. And we're like, come on. And so like you just feel like about as hardcore as you can feel. So there's a little bit of like awesomeness to it, which is probably arrogant, but it's fine. You leave it once you leave the mountain. But it does kind of give you a confidence. Like if you're in a meeting with somebody and they're like all kind of itchy about something trivial, you're like, these people, they don't know life and death. And so it kind of gives you like a little bit of like boost to like kind of have perspective on things. But when you go climb, and I'm going to show you one more piece of gear. When you do this kind of climbing, and at this point in life, it's me and my friend Andrew, and he and I are doing this alpine climbing together. I've done it with a couple of other guys, but Andrew in particular, you wear this like little tiny helmet. This thing's a little beat up, but like, I don't know how that helps you, but we wear them anyway. You bring 1 70-meter rope, and then you also have what's called, you have these cams, and you put these cams, they retract, and you put it in a weakness in the rock, a crack. Hopefully you find a parallel crack, and you can put it in that crack. And then when it gets weighted, these lobes on the cam don't open up. And so these are rated, if the rock's really good, this will hold 2,000 pounds. I mean, they're kind of amazing little devices. And so I say all that to say, in 2020, on Andrew and I's maybe 5th trip to the Pacific Northwest to do one of these alpine climbing trips, we've been doing this for about 10 years together. He and I go, and we start on a peak we've done it before. We've climbed it a couple of times. It's not a hard climb. It's a scary climb, but it's not a hard climb. There's one section that has maybe 1,000 feet of vertical exposure, but you're like, I mean, super safe. And so it's just like, it just gets in your head. And so to get there though, you've got to go up a snowfield and you wear your crampons. He and I did that, no problem. Got pictures of he and I smiling, like putting our crampons on, like we're finally doing it. We get our ice axes out. We walk up this big glaciated ramp. We get to a rock wall, and that rock wall is about 600 feet, and it's about 5 pitches of climbing. So you use that rope, and you kind of run it out to the halfway point. Then you belay the next person up, and then you use that rope again, and the lead person is climbing, and every time they get to a weakness in the rock, a place you can put one of these, you put this in, and then you clip your rope into here, and now you're safe again. You climb up further, you put a cam in or a nut, and then you clip your rope to the carabiner. We did all of that section fine. I led all of those pitches, which means that I started with the rope kind of below me, and I went up and I put all the cams in and clipped off, and then he followed me up. I belayed him up. We get to the last little section before we get to the final climb. This next section is snow. So think about snow, rock, snow, rock. And so when we're on the second steep section of snow, Andrew looked at me. I said, man, that looks scary. And he looked at me and said, I want to lead it. I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, I want to lead it. And I said, okay. So I said, hey, here's the problem with this section. I don't have any real good place to belay you. All I can do is stand behind this boulder, and you're going to have to go up, traverse this super steep snowfield, and then go to the rock before you can do anything to protect yourself. So you're basically going to be free soloing with a rope dragging behind you. And if you fall, you're going to pendulum back down below me behind this rock, and it's going to be a really bad fall. So don't fall. And he was like, no problem. We've done this 2 other times in the past. He goes up, he starts to traverse the super steep snowfield, and as he does, he picks one foot up and it catches his pants leg with his crampons. And so now he's trapped, and he starts to tip over, and he begins to fall head first. And as he falls head first, I start taking in rope as fast as I can take in rope on my belay device, meaning I'm trying to shorten the distance of rope between he and I. And he continues to gain speed. He rights himself, he falls head first, he rights himself on the snow, he digs his ice axe in like I showed you that you're supposed to dig it in, and as he does, it pings off of the ice. and he's just gaining speed. And so as he gains speed, I take what rope is left, and there seems to be miles of it still out. And I begin to run, and there's a cliff on this side, and I thought, okay, if I jump off the cliff, it'll stop him, and then I can get back up. And so I begin to run, and as I'm about to take off of the cliff, the rope goes tight. He finally stopped falling, and so I take rope, I slowly work myself to him, to where I can kind of see he's disappeared in this rock cleft. And I just thought, you know how when like you're in a bad situation, like you can slow things down with your mind, and you can kind of like process things in like almost like still images. I remember seeing his head bounce off a rock, and I thought, he's dead. I am attached to my friend who's dead. And it seemed, I don't know how much time passed, but I heard him, I mean, he's a tough guy. I heard him make noises that you never want to hear another human make. And then I thought, okay, he's alive, but probably not for long. And so I began to take up rope and I began to lean over the cliff where he is. And as I lean over the cliff, I can barely see his helmet. And we start communicating, and I'm like, okay, he's alive. I don't know how much time he has. By the hand of God, I happened to look on the backside of this rock that I had already looked at, and there's a perfect horizontal crack. I was like, I don't know how I missed that before, but here it is. And so I took 3 of these cams. There's 4 in my hand. 3 of these. I plugged them into the rock. I made a quick rescue scenario, or quick rescue apparatus, and I began to raise him up. And when I got him up, I began to inspect him. And he was talking about how bad his head hurt, how bad his shoulder hurt, and how his legs weren't working. And so I get him situated. I'm doing a full inspection, and I don't see anything on him there's nothing obvious of, okay, his shoulder's like hanging down, so I know he's got a broken collarbone, or there's no blood anywhere. He doesn't have what do they call it? The teepee. I don't know if you know this. When a man gets a head injury, sometimes he gets an erection. Weird. I don't know why. He doesn't have a teepee, which I didn't know at the time, but a friend of mine who's a fireman said, "Did you look for the teepee?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he told me, and I was like, "No, thank the Lord, no." I didn't look for that. I had no idea that was a thing. So if you see a fireman checking you out after a car wreck, like, just know that's what's happening. So now we're about 500 feet of rock between us and the first snowfield. So we spend the next, I don't know how many hours, and I lower him down every belay. He's just kind of hanging there, and because he can't really move very well, I lower him down. I yell at him. I say, "Hey, stay down there. Just sit." And so he sits, and then I come down, and then I get him situated, and we go to the next belay spot, and I lower him down another rope pitch, and we're just keep this process, and it's just going. I don't know how many hours it was. When we finally get down to the glacier, I'm behind him a pretty good ways because I've got to re-rig everything, come down. When we finally get down to the glacier, he's standing up. And he's got his crampons like ready to go, his ice axe in his hand. I was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I feel a lot better." I was like, "Okay, all right, it's a miracle." And so we go back to camp. By the time we get back to camp, it's almost dark, and we hug each other. Now we've like slept in the same tent, so we spent a ton of time together. We don't touch though. Like, we don't touch, it's like bros. It's like, bruh. Like, it's like bros. Like, we're hugging, we're crying. We can't believe he's still alive. That whole night, I'm waking up multiple times in the night, making sure that he's okay, making sure that like he's comfortable. We get down into the car the next day, another 2 hours down through pretty rugged terrain, get back to the car, and he's like dead set on driving. And I was like, "Hey, I have a license too." And so he's dead set on driving. So he drives about 30 minutes, and then he pulls over and he said, I can't do anything. My head hurts so bad. And I was like, "Yeah, you think?" Like, his helmet was throttled. It was totally destroyed. And so we get down, we pull over, I drive, we get to the hospital. It's COVID, it's August of 2020. He calls me and says, "Hey, I'm having to go get a CAT scan. They won't I had a head injury, so make me get a CAT scan. I was like, okay, that's great. And so he goes and gets the scan. I see him walking across the parking lot. I can't go in the hospital. I see him walking across the parking lot. I'm eating lunch because I'd already gone to a grocery store, and I'm like, this is amazing. This food's awesome. He's walking. We're good. He calls me 20, 30 minutes later, and he says, hey, my neck is broken. My neck's broken, and they won't let me walk anywhere. I said, what? He said, yeah, my neck's broken. Can you come in? They'll let you come in. I put you down as next of kin. And so I'm like, all right. Am I your dad? Am I your uncle? Am I your brother? What am I? So I walk in. I end up following an ambulance all the way to Seattle. If you remember anything about Seattle in 2020, it was the Wild West. Every first floor of every building, house, and hotel had plywood boarded up all over it. So we go to the hospital. I follow him in, and as soon as we get in, they begin to say, hey, we're going to do surgery on him. Here's the type of spinal surgery we're going to do. And I'm like, whoa, you haven't even done a test on it. You can't do surgery. Long story short, this is like part 2. I'll just briefly tell you. Long story short, for the next 3 days, I have nurses sneaking me images that the hospital won't let me see of all the x-rays and the other things going on with him. I'm talking with lawyers and doctors back here in Atlanta. And everyone is telling him, all the doctors there are saying, you've got to have surgery right now. The doctors and lawyers back here are saying, man, I hate to say it, but somebody's looking for money. He does not need surgery. He needs to come home. So 3 days, we battle back and forth in the hospital. Finally, I have our doctor here in Atlanta, who is a West Point grad, a military trauma spinal doctor, who has a practice here in Atlanta, on the phone with their doctor, and they're arguing back and forth. Finally, the doctor in Atlanta says, look, I respect you, but you don't know what you're doing here. You gotta let him go. And I looked at the doctor and I said, look, we're going AMA, we're going against medical advice, we're leaving. The doctor said, there's your shoes. You know where the elevator is. So I go get the car, I go pick him up. We end up back in Atlanta, and months later, he's fully recovered. He's never had to have surgery. We're redoing that trip this August. I mean, it's just been a miracle, one thing after the other. But the whole time, I just kept wondering, what did I do wrong? Like, what did he do wrong that this would happen to us? And now that's like, I mean, for weeks I would close my eyes and I would see him falling. It was, I've never had PTSD, but I think this was PTSD. It was just really, really tragic. It was really scary. It was very emotional. It was just the two of us that shared the experience. So it's really hard to even translate it to other people. But in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking the whole time, like, what did I do wrong? And then I start kind of backing up from that, and I'm like, why do I think I did something wrong? Because I had to have done something wrong, because something bad happened in my life. And it took almost 2 years after that. It's taken 4 years for me to really understand. I think all growing up, I heard the gospel of Jesus. I heard the message of salvation. I heard that I was sinful, I was separated from God, that Jesus died on a cross for my sins, and that if I would trust him, I would be saved. And so I did. I would pray that prayer like often, like, God, please save me. And I believed Jesus died on the cross. And like as a kid, the alternative is like, it's either Jesus, which seems pretty good, or hell. And I was like, no, that's smart, but like, go with Jesus. Like that's a pretty good ticket. But I think I don't know if I was taught or if I just believed, but I was kind of taught like the cross of Jesus was like enough barely. Like he'll save you, but maybe not. And so I had this image in my head, track with me here. I had this image in my head of, this is like, it's taken a long time to kind of process all this. Like, why would I go through this traumatic situation and think what did we do wrong to end up with something bad happening to us, it actually went fully back to my understanding of God. It went back to my understanding of Jesus even. I thought as a young man, I really thought that the way Jesus worked was, I'm out in a body of water. This was like the visual. I'm out in this body of water and I'm drowning. And Jesus is like standing on the shore and he has like a life preserver with a rope on it. And the way you get saved is he takes that life preserver with a rope and he throws it to you and you better hold on. And then he drags you onto shore and you're safe. And so my understanding of God, my understanding of Jesus, my understanding of the gospel was that, like, yes, it works, but it takes a lot of me. And so Jesus, like, he can save you, but like barely. Because how tight can you hold on? And maybe I wasn't holding on tight enough in August of 2020. Maybe Andrew wasn't holding on tight enough in August of 2020. Maybe God was trying to wake us up and like punish us because we weren't holding on tight enough as he's dragging us to the shore. I had this, and then I started to realize, like, every time something bad happened in my life, it must be because I was like not pleasing God. Now, I do think God gets our attention. I do think God punishes sin. But I'm talking any bad thing. Somebody rear ends me and drives away and I have to pay the $500 deductible or whatever. Like, God must be getting me. And it wasn't until a year or two later, and I was really wrestling with this in August of 2020, like this whole thing of salvation. Now I'm a pastor. I'm like preaching, and I'm preaching one thing, but I'm really believing another. I'm believing like a real partial truth about God, that he'll save, but just barely. And in 2021, I came on staff at Christ Covenant, and my first Tuesday night, we did this young adult thing on Tuesday night where a bunch of young adults come together. My first Tuesday night, I preached on Ephesians chapter 2. And the gospel was really starting to settle. And I think God used this terrible situation as kind of the exclamation mark of, Thomas, do you believe that you really have to be good enough, strong enough? Do you really believe that you were like treading water and I threw you this lifesaver? Or maybe I'm stronger than that. I used to think it was how tight I could hold on to him. But that situation made me question all of that, because I was like, we weren't doing anything wrong. We weren't out there with like other women. We weren't out there like just living this crazy life. We were just like, we took PTO, we're like honest about where we were going. Like we paid for it ourselves. Like maybe some bad things just happen. And maybe it's not all dependent on me. And then I read, it was like I had put on glasses and I could see for the first time Ephesians 2. And Ephesians 2 says, and you were dead in your trespasses and sin. And when I saw that for the first time clearly, just a few years ago, I thought, I'm not treading water. And Jesus is throwing me a life preserver. I was dead on the bottom. I was dead on the bottom. I had no strength to hold on to this life preserver. And so you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, that the Spirit is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out our desires of the body and mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. And then listen to this verse. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love, I really didn't believe God loved me. I believed he tolerated me. Because of the great love, being rich in mercy, because of the great love which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised up with him, and seated with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And then it goes on and it says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. It took like that super traumatic trip for God to really get in front of my face and say, Thomas, life brings stuff at you. And if you think every bad thing that happens to you is me like putting my thumb on you because I'm so displeased with you, I can hardly stand you, then you don't know me at all. Because what the Bible says is that when I was dead on the bottom of the lake, he loved me with a great love and had great mercy. He not only swam down, pulled me back, pulled me out, and brought me to life, he then swam out and died in my place. So I'm really glad we went through this moment together, me and Andrew. I'm really glad that I stumbled across Matthew 5:45, where Jesus says he causes it to rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. He causes the sun to shine on the righteous and the unrighteous, where I realize, man, life just has a bunch of stuff it throws at you. But if I think that it's me holding on to God, I've got it all wrong. I need to realize it's him holding on to me. I could tell you a bunch more about that story, a few other stories, but the point is, I'm so glad that I was faced with this big life-changing moment of what did I do wrong, to realize that's how I've been viewing God my whole life, and it's not right. That's not a God of love and mercy that dies in our place, that pulls us up when we're dead, raises us to life, and goes instead, trade spots, and he's the one on the bottom of the lake.